Welcome back to the Monochrome Podcast, episode 33. We are so glad that you are here with us. My name is JT. I am the marketing manager here at SALT. I'm joined with Keith Beck.
Hello.
We are so glad you're here. If you're new to the Monochrome Podcast, we are here not because we know everything and have all the answers, but because we want to present to you some ideas, some thoughts, some challenges, some encouragement that maybe you haven't heard of or thought of, some technology. And so we're going to ask questions, we're going to discuss, but ultimately we just want to encourage you to dive deeper and learn more and be exposed to some new stuff that maybe you haven't been to before. So this week we're going to be hearing from Warren Davis, who's become a great friend of mine. He is the central team leader of broadcast support at Life.Church. So it's going to be a great conversation. Very excited about that. But also, so you know, next week we're talking to Jay Cranda, who is the author of The Online Church is Not the Answer, and he serves as the online pastor at Saddleback Church. So it's an interesting title for him to publish. So we're excited for you to get to hear that conversation and learn more about him. But let's dive straight into today's hot take. Keith, what is your hot take? Let's get some blood boiling.
All right. Well, I've been wanting to do one of these, and so I'm so glad I finally get the opportunity. I am full of hot takes, so I apologize. You know, I tend to be kind of a contrarian by nature. Some people that know me, they know that very well. My wife,
church creatives are never contrarian.
Yeah, sure.
How dare you?
So, but what I want to talk about today is I think that Christian filmmaking as an art form needs to be celebrated. It does not need to be sabotaged. So what I mean by that is there's a lot of controversy surrounding any kind of project that comes out that deals with anything in the Bible. So I think the most obvious and glaring example would be The Chosen, right? Even more recently, we have the House of David pop up on Amazon. Amazon Studios actually funds quite a large budget for that production. And season 2 is probably right around the corner with the results that they got on viewership. But for whatever reason in the church, we can be very critical of our Christian filmmakers who are trying very hard to make good, wholesome, God-honoring, biblical, entertaining content. It's a hard balance to make. I think people don't realize that between an hour and a half and 2.5 hours, you have got to set up a story. You've got to introduce characters. You've got to make those characters multidimensional. You've got to have 3 acts, unless you're an alien film and you cheat and you have a 4th act. Christian filmmaking can't do that because we can't cheat. But ultimately, it's not a lot of time to make really good art. And so in that process, you're going to have to take some creative liberties in order to move the story along, or in order to explore themes and different dimensions to certain characters, which I think is something that The Chosen does extremely well by kind of exploring who are all these characters, cast of characters that follow Jesus around during his time, his life and his ministry on earth. But ultimately, what I want to do is say the reason we should support it is if you think about just the filmmaking entertainment industry over the last 100 years, okay, it has been consistently over that span of time spiraling into more and more agenda-driven, greater degeneracy with its themes and its visuals that it puts out there for people to consume. And that has been a net negative for society, I would say. I don't think that a lot of the films that we see these days that are celebrated tend to have really wholesome themes involved with them. They tend to explore some really dark corners and areas of society. And the great thing that we see happening at the same time as Hollywood is kind of moving in that direction, you see bigger production houses and streaming services funding these Christian projects where we get to tell stories that are wholesome, that do have a biblical worldview, that are really great pieces of art. We see the production quality increasing, the stories deepening. We see the budget's growing as well as the audience is growing. And I think that brings me to a really important point, which is when someone makes a film, they make it with an audience in mind. Not everyone goes into a Christopher Nolan film and enjoys the cerebral, kind of nonlinear storytelling aspect. They may instead prefer like Fast and the Furious, like high adrenaline, popcorn, escapism, just let me turn my brain off and let me enjoy. I just want to be entertained, and that's all I want. And so we have to realize too that at the end of the day, when a filmmaker is making a movie, it starts years before you actually see it. And in that early period of writing a script and thinking through things, you're considering what kind of audience do I want this to connect with. Not everything is going to connect with you, like in your church and the way that you see things. It's going to expand. Christian filmmaking is going to want to reach people from outside the church walls. Mm-hmm. I think the danger comes, and rightful criticism is when we compromise on theology, right? But ultimately what we want to do is not compromise on the theology, but realize that this is an entertainment resource that we're trying to create. We are storytelling, and it's important for us to let the filmmaker do what they're doing, to trust them that they know their audience that they're trying to reach and speak to, and that it does not have to always be overtly Christian. It can sometimes just bring in biblical themes and whatnot.
I think what I hear you saying, Keith, is like we, as creatives, obviously we're probably the most critical people of our own work and of others.
Absolutely.
And it's easy to, when, years ago, these movies were coming out and they were really cringy, or they kind of made the gospel seem soft or something like that. Or maybe they didn't have a hard gospel pitch in them. Maybe they were, maybe there's not as much of a bent. Now, obviously, House of David and Chosen are very gospel bent, but
exactly.
There are other ones who aren't as much. And it's easy to throw stones at those, or to say it's bad production value or whatever. But I think, but then we'll go watch, Barbie and be, elated because, whatever. But so I think it's important to like us as creatives, we should be the biggest cheerleaders for like, yes, let's make great Christian films. Maybe they're not perfectly biblically accurate. Maybe they don't line up with my theology exactly. Maybe there's some actors who we don't really like, or the production value isn't perfect. But I mean, when you look at the track record, Christian filmmaking and TV show making has come a long way from where it originally started, probably a couple decades ago. And I think too, it's important to recognize that like you said, every Christian project doesn't have to be a documentary about Jesus or a hard gospel pitch. Like it can be just good Christian, wholesome entertainment that has Christian values in it, family values, that is pushing those great, all the great stories. We were just talking about this before. Every truly great story is simply a mirror or a somewhat copy of the story of the gospel and the ultimate story of redemption. And so if you're telling a story about redemption and a story that mirrors the gospel that's in a wholesome, good way, then I think that can be good Christian entertainment. I think people want that. House of David broke like a ton of records. They did incredible. I watched through all of it. It was incredible to watch. Really great production value, really great storytelling. Maybe it's not 100% biblically accurate, but there's probably so many people who have watched that who had no idea what the story of David was, who have never seen the Bible come to life in such a real, tangible way before, that would maybe have never been interested in the story in the stories of the Old Testament, that maybe now are a little bit more curious, and maybe like, hey, maybe the book's better than the movie. I'm going to go read the book, Exactly. So I think it's important that we, we're positive, we champion that. I also think it's important. We could talk about this for a long time, so I don't want to go a whole lot further. But
I've barely scraped the surface of like the thoughts that I have. Because
there's a lot to unpack in this one.
when I talked to a filmmaker last year and was recruiting him to be a workshop speaker for us, he's got a very busy schedule working many projects, so it hasn't worked out yet. But he told me, he said, Keith, I'm not a Christian filmmaker. I'm a filmmaker that is a Christian. And what he saw was I'm not making overtly Christian, films, but what I am doing is I'm telling stories with, themes of hope and redemption, and ultimately with a nugget of truth in there, because that's the content we need to start creating. And so I say we celebrate these people, because I think that they are utilizing a skill set that is niche, because there's a lot that goes into filmmaking. I love films. I can't make films. It takes a level of skill and talent that I don't have.
And it's expensive.
And it's very expensive. That's the biggest hurdle of them all. but at the end of the day, these people are really putting their necks out there with big budgets these days, and they've got to produce. And I think that they've done a pretty good job recently of trying to honor, the church.
And I think people have said this before, but we have the best story to tell, and it's got all the elements of storytelling. It is the rubric for a great story. And so I think as many ways as we can tell that story in as many creative outlets and genres and formats as we can do it excellently, we should. And it's not always going to be perfect. We're not always going to nail it, but at least we're telling it. And I think that's what's important, We talk a lot about SALT coming up here in October, but the day before SALT, October 7th, I want to tell you about the Worship Classic put on by Amplio Systems. It is going to be a super fun golfing event. It's totally free. So if you're coming to SALT, or if you're not planning on coming to SALT, you should still sign up for the Worship Classic and then come to SALT. Come golf with us. Come hang out. Amplio Systems is a great partner. They're a partner for this season of the podcast, and they are not just there to install gear at your church. They are leaders who've been in the trenches. They've all served in churches, and they know the pressure of Sundays and believe that your AV systems should support your ministry and not distract from it. That's why they work with churches from start to finish, designing future-proof, volunteer-friendly systems that help you and your people encounter Jesus each and every week. So if you want to learn more about the Worship Classic or Amplio Systems, go check out the links in the show notes. So moving on, we're going to talk about, I'm going to go over this really quickly. I saw this cool product I just wanted to tell you about. It is called the, I lost it now. It's called the Dolly Plus. So I'll put a link in the show notes to it. But basically what it is, there's a lot of cool stuff coming out, I feel like, all the time now, especially with the advent of AI. These technologies that maybe weren't possible before are now possible. And so it's basically this automated dolly tripod that you can put your camera on, and it can do automated motion tracking and moving on a stage or in a studio to shoot something in a video format. So very cool stuff. I would imagine that you can control it with a joystick or your phone or something. So it's almost like it could be a really advanced PTZ. So maybe if you don't have roamers on your stage, or you don't want to have just a stagnant track, some people put a little camera next to the piano that moves or something like that. You can have something that actually moves on its own across the stage or in a studio setting. So I'll put a link down in the description. I think it's super useful, especially for the creative teams or creative who's kind of doing it all by themselves and need some tools in their tool belt to.
Can I make one note about this thing?
Yeah.
If you do invest in this, you might want to have a conversation with your more adventurous worship leaders. I'm talking about the ones that like to wander around the stage. Because they need to know where the track is. Because you don't want the two colliding.
There is no track.
Of worship. Right, that's what I'm saying. Yeah. The track that you plan for it to move around, they need to know. Yeah. Hey, you don't ever want to step over here, okay? Because it's going to cross this path 3 or 4 times.
That's a great point. Yeah, I hadn't thought of that. So anyway, go check it out. I think it's kind of interesting. But something that I want to tell you about that is very interesting that we want you to be a part of is SALT 2025. And so we know that you guys are dealing with a lot of problems week in and week out. And if you're listening to this podcast, it means that you're the type of person who comes to SALT. The people who come to SALT are the people who are looking to grow. They're looking to learn more, to find new technologies, new networks, new communities, new ways of doing things. And so if you've enjoyed the podcast and you find value from it, double that, triple that, quadruple that, 10x that. That's what conference is. You're going to be rejuvenated, encouraged. And so we want you to go check that out, salt2025.com. Also want to let you know, we started promoting a promo code. So if you use the code Monochrome when you check out for your tickets, you'll get $20 off. And then that'll also stack. If you have a group, you get an additional $40 off per ticket. So you can get $60 off your tickets if you use the code. So anyway, go check that out. And we'd love for you to be there. All right. Coming up next is our conversation that we had recently with Warren Davis, who is the central team leader of broadcast support at Life.Church. Incredible guy, very, very talented, great leader. You're going to learn a lot from him. He's awesome. And if you know who Life.Church is, they are arguably the biggest live stream church in the world, and doing that on a very high level, reaching millions of people each week with the gospel. And so I encourage you, go check that out. And we'll see you on the other side.
I am so excited to have Warren Davis here with me. How are you, my friend?
I'm doing well, Luke. How are you?
I am doing so well. We were just chatting before we hit record, and I am stoked for this conversation.
I am too.
Give a quick glimpse, Warren, of kind of, you've worked in churches of all sizes. You've been the it guy. You're now at Life.Church. But before we kind of get to Life.Church, kind of walk me through, what was that trajectory like? What are some of those churches you've been a part of?
Sure. Well, I haven't always worked at Life.Church and churches the size and scope of Life.Church. In fact, one of the first churches I worked at was a portable church where if we had 50 people showing up, that was a great Sunday. So I just want to throw that out there as, yes, it's a very relatable, or I can relate to a lot of people that are out there that may be in churches of every size. So starting where you might be unloading a trailer and carrying in tech stuff inside of bankers' boxes, or if you've got a small church in more traditional footprint, all the way to multi-campus. I've kind of done a little bit of everything. So part of, again, my first role would have been portable church. I've also been able to serve in some churches in the DFW area. That's where my wife and I actually started out leading worship in Dallas-Fort Worth. And then in 2007, we actually moved to Lakeland, Florida. And she was the worship pastor at a church out there, a 2-campus church. And I was the technical director. And you asked what was it like to be kind of the it guy. The staff there was really, on the technical side, was really, really competent because it was a staff of one. And
you.
Yeah. And it was one of those
really
things.
Brief.
Yeah. Well, they were very quick. So, I had to learn a lot of things, so you come into the situations where I had been on both sides of the stage and learned production as I had gone on, and mainly audio production. And then all of a sudden I'm in charge of IT, and I'm in charge of some video production and graphics and making small group curriculum. And,
oh man,
you're just trying to figure out, okay, well, how do I do all of these things? And you just quickly determine you better be a learner if you want to keep up with things. And there are elements of that season that I look back on and go, man, that could be frustrating if you look at it through a certain lens. But then there are elements of that season that can be preparing you.
Yeah.
If you look at it through another lens, because you're developing yourself. God's always developing you for what's next, if you allow that to happen within you. And so, it just was preparing me.
Because I think I think that you're going to resonate with a lot of people that listen to this, because everybody, I think, that listens to this has multiple hats that they wear. I mean, the fact that you were doing graphic design on top of IT work. I mean, what technical person in the church is not having to be an expert in networking and technical or in IT?
Absolutely.
Right now, right? But what a great reminder that like in the season you're in, what are you learning that is preparing you for another season? In those seasons, how do you learn how to cut corners without cutting ministry, right? How do you become efficient? How do you become highly effective with your time? Because time is the most valuable resource when you're a team of one, right?
Yeah, it's always slipping away. And so, you have to be able to manage your time well, which is a skill I'm constantly learning. One of the things I've picked up from Pastor Craig over the years is he says, you don't grow with your yes, you grow with your no's. And I'm really, really bad at looking at things and saying, oh, yes, I can do that. Yes, I can do that. And then I'm totally overwhelmed. And so that's something that I'm constantly reminding myself of, putting too much on my plate. And then trying to scale back or renegotiate those commitments. But in terms of being a learner, I picked this up from Tim Ferriss a long time ago. You hear the phrase of a jack of all trades and a master of none. And really in this day and age, especially for tech personnel and production personnel within the church, I feel like you should try to be a jack of all trades and a master of some. Because the age of specialization is kind of gone. Like you need to become a generalist.
Yeah.
And so you may not be I'm certainly not a master IT person. I am not a master video editor. I'm not a master graphic designer, but I can do a little bit of all of it. I'm conversant in those skills because I needed to adapt and become conversant in those skills. That's what the role required. And that's where a lot of people live today. And it's not, giving leadership a pass to burn people out, but it is part and parcel of what we sign up for as creative production personnel who are called to serve the church.
Yeah, that's so good. Well, let's fast forward to Life.Church. You're now the central team leader of broadcast support, if I'm not mistaken. Kind of give a glimpse of how you got there.
Yeah, so I would just say part of my first exposure to Life.Church, if I can, would be when Life.Church launched Open. So at the time, my wife and I were leading worship. We had an itinerant worship band, and we were somewhere in Texas leading for a youth ministry. And the youth pastor informed us that he had just discovered these open resources that Life.Church had launched, Life.Church TV at the time, Life.Church.tv. And I was like, always looking for little hacks. You talked about being efficient, right? Because I would constantly be putting together graphics for DNOWs or any sort of branding that our group would be doing. And now you could go out and find a church that had already done graphics and they're offering unflattened PSDs. Again, I'm not the world's best graphic designer. And I could take these unflattened PSDs that already look great
update it,
and I can manipulate them and make them look fantastic within 10 minutes. There's a hack. And I was like, it just struck a chord with me, the generosity of a church that could, with integrity, monetize those resources, because there's definitely hours invested in making those resources. And they just made the decision, we're just going to give all these things away to bless the capital C church. And that never left me in terms of as an impact and something in the back of my mind. And then fast forward to, I think it was Catalyst 2010, was the first time I heard Pastor Craig speak live. And at conferences, as you know, Luke, all communicators kind of throw their fastball. And I was sitting there listening to everybody. They're all doing fantastic. But Pastor Craig got up and spoke, and sometimes communicators resonate differently with certain people. And it was still years before I joined the Life.Church team, but there was something different and unique for his voice and what he spoke at that time that resonated with me. And I remember there was a voice in the back of my head that said, that's a leader that you can work for.
That's cool.
And it just never left me. And so in 2015, there was an opportunity, an open role that fit for me to apply, come on the team. And I've now gratefully been here for 10 years, and it has been the best and the richest 10 years of ministry that I've had so far. And I wouldn't trade it for the world.
And would you say that the vast majority of your day is leading teams of people who are sort of the it guy in their own little field, or whether or not they're in a different campus, or you guys are supporting all the different campuses. You're on the central team, right? So
Yes.
Give a little context to that.
Yeah. The vast majority of my day now has been equipping and leading the it guy or it girl for what they do and removing obstacles and roadblocks so that they can do their role to the best of their ability. So we talked a little bit before the call started about moving from maybe individual contributor to leader and making that shift. And
yeah, if I can jump in real quick, I think one of the things that's so unique about the community that we serve is so many listening to this may be the it person. And I'm sitting here having a conversation with Warren Davis, who's now the leader of it people. And it's funny because there's a dichotomy in our world where if you do your job really, really well, you're going to probably be called out by your leader, or in another position, another church or whatever, you're going to be called to now lead. And so instead of doing, you're leading a bunch of doers. Let's talk about that jump. Let's talk about what that's like, because we're one of the unique sort of spaces in the church where leadership is not the natural skill set, right? A technical ability is usually the natural skill set, and we have to kind of learn how to lead. What have you learned in that sort of journey, that process?
It's a really hard shift because you're so used to, like, if we, again, go back to, like, the first thing I learned was skills, hard skills. Let me grab this hard skill. I'm going to take some Photoshop courses online. That's easy. And then let me take a Final Cut course online. That's easy. I can do that. Let me go to a Yamaha digital mixing day. That's easy. I can do that. Then it's, okay, now what do I do? Because now I'm going to learn to lead other people. Well, there are resources for that, but that's not our natural bend. That's not our natural gifting. So
it's also not a 10-minute YouTube video.
No, it's not. And it's something that you develop definitely over the course of time. And time is a resource you can't speed up. And so often when we're consuming technical content, we go, okay, I got that. I know how to manipulate these layers or whatever. But dealing with people and investing in them over time, that's a journey. And so the first thing I think of as a leader is you want to take who you are and reproduce yourself in other people, because teams take on the characteristics of their coach. And so as you start to build a team, and I talked a little bit about this at conference, but you're looking for what I call the 3 C's: character, culture, and competency. And so I'm looking for people who have the right character and the right culture to be on the team first. Competency, because we just talked about learning, right? That's probably the lowest thing in my pantheon of the C's.
And why is that?
Because we can learn skills very easy. Character is a non-negotiable for me.
Yeah.
Right?
It's not really very learnable.
Yeah. And now that doesn't mean any of us, like, all of us have areas within our integrity that God's refining, and in our character that God's working on. Okay, so I'm not looking for people who are professing to be perfect. I am looking for people who are professing to be honest and open. But I'm looking for people with high character. That's a non-negotiable. And then culture is just fitment, alignment with the organization, people who are good hangs, people who can follow not my leadership as much as the leadership of the organization top down. Because when you don't agree with the direction of the organization, it's really, really hard then to execute on initiatives that are, hey, we're headed in this direction for Easter, or this is something that we're rolling out for this campaign. If you're not in alignment with leadership, then the behavior that is required to execute on that doesn't follow. And it's very difficult because it just becomes...
You're not just talking like a theological specificity of a denomination.
No.
You're talking overall culture.
Yes.
Do you guys have any tools or anything that you use to kind of help assess cultural fits?
Oh yeah. We have what we call sustaining attributes and aligning behavioral norms. So
sounds like a really institutionalized phrase.
I know. But you know what? Culture is a combination of what you create and allow.
Yeah.
And again, these are things that we really, really drill in. But what you'll find is that we're very intentional about it. And so, like, one of them would be excellence. And we know that excellence honors God and inspires people. And so we just tell people over and over and over again those two things. And then in the context of my team, what I'll say is excellence is found in preparation, not in perfection. And so we don't bat 1,000 because there's this fear of ever taking a risk or ever swinging because, if it's not perfect, then it wasn't excellent. No, if you have the appropriate layers and levels of backup or redundancy in place and something fails, then it's okay because we were prepared, right? Everybody that's on this podcast or on this watching this later has clicked on something on a ProPresenter slide and it didn't quite fire correctly, right? Or they ran a queue and something went haywire. And it's funny because in our world, and Pastor Craig says this all the time, he's very intentional about acknowledging the production people of, man, nobody ever looks at y'all unless something goes wrong.
Dude,
right?
We're like the IRS or the Secret Service is maybe a better thing. You only know about the failures. You don't really know about all the successes.
Right. And so it's like, we know when something goes wrong, but I can stand and say, okay, in rehearsal, if we watch that ProPresenter video, front to back, we checked it for audio, video, and then we had some sort of backup or redundancy plan in place. Then I know with integrity, okay, we were prepared. So even if it failed in service, did that miss my excellence bar? Yeah. No, that was still excellent. You know, we had Pastor Craig's mic fail 2 months ago in a service live on a weekend. But we had his backup mic that we had already tested, was already power locked on, ready for him to pick up. We knew the plan. He picked it up, was ready to go. So was that excellent or was that a failure? And so it still honored God and inspired people in terms of our value organizationally of excellence, which drives our culture. But it didn't, for me, it was in the preparation, not in the perfection. And so all those things make our culture on our team or help define our culture. So we got character, we got culture. And then the competency to me is the third piece. And that is what we work on developing. And so if I'm building the team, moving from individual contributor to team leader, I'm looking for two things. One, my preference is and you have to move to secure leader for this, but my preference is I want to find people that if I'm the person that's doing it all, I want to find a Photoshop guy or girl that is 10x what I am, right? And I want to find a Final Cut or Premiere or Resolve editor that is 10x what I am. And definitely a network engineer that's 100x what I am, because I can barely set up a DHCP server. You know, so all those hard skills, you want to find people that can run further and faster than you.
Yeah.
But the reality is in the church world, and we're all navigating the same set of parameters. We'll just take IT as an example. You know, those skill sets are more valuable outside of the nonprofit world than they are inside of the for-profit world, inside of the nonprofit world. So sometimes you're looking at somebody who maybe is a high potential player that can develop those skills over time, but they're going to specialize. We go, again, from generalist maybe to specialist and say, okay, this is going to be your primary focus, and you're going to grow into this, and you're going to help coach and develop them, and maybe, again, clear the pathway for them to develop into somebody that's past you.
And what I've found, Warren, I don't know what your reaction to this is, but I've found that the larger an organization gets, or the larger a team of an organization gets, the more specializations are needed. But you're right in the standpoint of the most valuable asset you can be to your church, your organization, a future employer, is going to be a generalist unless you're jumping into an organization maybe the size of a Life Church where, I mean, how many people are in your central team within broadcast production?
Okay, so my specific team, right now we have 6.
Okay.
And then, so it's actually a leaner team than you probably would expect.
A lot leaner than I expected. This is what I love about Life Church. We were talking about this ahead of time, but like, you know, your main broadcast campus, you said was like 1,300 to 1,500 people. And I think people always think like, oh, Pastor Craig and Life Church, they're at like 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 people. And I'm like, no. That's probably a far more attainable building. But anyway, yeah, so way leaner than I was expecting.
Yeah. And then we have our sister team is our experience team, which is 3 people that work directly with Pastor Craig to film and capture all of the content for him on a weekend. And so that is like both halves of our like weekend team. So we're doing the backroom engineering, capturing, production management between our Edmond campus and control room, and then experience team, which is interfacing directly with Pastor Craig, you know, in terms of like sermon prep and operating physically the switcher. My parallel would be Mark Dawson, who's been Pastor Craig's video director for 25 years now.
Dang, he could probably watch what he's going to do with his eyes.
He can. It's hilarious that there's like, I call it the Pac-Man pattern. Like he knows exactly where Pastor Craig is moving on stage. And there's this dance of, that's how Pastor Craig is almost video directing with where he walks. He knows what camera is going to be cut next, but they have refined really well a pattern of how the message would be cut, which they feel is the most effective way for Pastor Craig to communicate. And again, it goes back to that intention, right? Everything is very intentional for how we present. And we found it to be very effective.
I'd be remiss in the time that we have left. I'd be remiss not to get to this question, but you know, you and I have talked about capabilities and how we can grow skill-based capabilities when it comes to audio or graphic design or something like that. I want to speak for a second here on just the skill set of leading people, or I may go as far as saying becoming a pastor of people, which I think is a very critical skill set capability to have as you step from sort of maybe audio engineer to technical director to production pastor or something along those lines. What do you say about that? How do you level up that skill? What advice would you have in that regard?
Yeah, well, as any good pastor would tell you, you're either going to do an acrostic or you're going to do alliteration, right? So I've given you 3 C's: character, competency, and we're going to have to do that one again. Character, culture, competency, and then it's going to be caring and calling is pastoring, right? And so for caring, pastoring for people is simply just caring for people. And I have found for me, in one of the biggest ways that I've grown is as a tech person, the default is a lot of introverted people who are isolated, and they just can really, what makes them great is the ability to get really hyper-focused, especially when you're like in the learning mode, right? But that also like is also what puts like walls and boundaries up with people, even unintentionally. Yeah. And it comes across as cold. And so like for me, I did an EQI assessment, which is an emotional quotient assessment many years ago. And my empathy scores were extremely low on this EQI assessment. And I really had to like wrestle with that and think through that. But I really worked at growing in that skill because it's a skill you can grow in, not in a way to like, okay, let me just figure out how to get a better score on this test, but earnestly like, God, how do I see the perspective of other people? And it really boiled down to like, how do I care more for other people? and understand where they're coming from. And that opened up or unlocked for me how to pastor people better, because it made me a better listener. It made me more relational as a leader instead of more task focused of let's go to the next thing and let's just attack the next problem, which again, that's our bias. That's our default. We are going to get things done. It made me care more about the individual than the output. And that's a big thing with pastoring people.
Yeah, and I think you're diving into the difference between being a leader or pastor and being a manager of people, right? Because it's not just project management and getting stuff done. It's doing it in a way that shows I care about you and I want you to develop.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And then I just think again about calling. If I look back at every stop that I've made along the way, I have had the honor of serving at basically 3 churches in a full-time capacity. And those seasons have not been short, relative, right? 5 years or 8 years or now 10 years. There's a sweetness to sustained ministry that I think, not in a way that I'm admonishing anyone, but that a lot of people I think miss out on. And I think calling helps sustain you through the hard times. And pastoring well, I think when you are anchored to your calling, you walk through life and seasons of life with other people through the ups and the downs. And it helps you just kind of gut it out. And I think people are very quick sometimes and I'm just saying this to our community, consider maybe what you miss out on when the average tenure for somebody in one of these roles that we're talking about and I'm speaking to is usually 12 to 18 months. And they will then jump and go to another church. A lot of times that's actually needed. You know, we talked about this at the beginning. If you're not in alignment with leadership or with culture, then that's kind of the best thing you can do. It's actually honoring to your leadership, right?
It's going to free you up to move on.
Yes. But if you have that repeated pattern, you're missing out on some sweetness that is there for you in ministry when you go through like kind of the ups and the downs and the seasons of life in ministry. And so like just staying anchored to your calling and being willing to gut it out with people, that actually grows you as a pastor when you lead through people. You know, you don't have to have a seminary degree. You don't have to be formally trained. That's one of the things that was so shocking to some of the New Testament people of like, they have no formal education, but what did they know? They had been with Jesus. And, you know, so the outflow of your personal relationship with Jesus will give you the inspiration to pastor and lead those in your orbit well. And so if you are a technical director and you don't even have the title of pastor, that's okay. You don't need that. You can still lead and pastor people well and stick it out with them. Wow. Stick it out for a season.
That's good. Yeah, Warren, I had an advisor, mentor person sort of tell me early as we were jumping into SALT, and he said, let me just make this clear. Vision and mission is not going to fuel you long-term. Success is not going to fuel you long-term. What's going to fuel you long-term as you jump into this calling of serving the creative and technical communities of the church is going to be Jesus. And I think what you just said sums that up. And this idea that you've got to make sure that it's Jesus who you're ultimately serving, and the purpose and relationship from that in which you are calling empathy and your capabilities and your competency and all this, which really kind of brings us all back to character, right? Like, does your relationship with Jesus become the foundation of why and sort of what you're doing? Man, Warren, so good. I feel like we could keep going for an hour or so on this. Obviously, you taught at conference last year, so if you're listening to this or watching this and kind of want to go deeper, go check that out. We've made that available, and I know that you will be enriched by what Warren taught. Warren, how can people connect with you?
Well, I'm always available at warren.davis@life.church. I love connecting with other churches. Our team loves connecting with other churches, and just in the same spirit of open. If you have a question about anything we do, our entire team, our entire playbook is an open book. And so you can reach out, send us an email if you want to connect on social media. I do post stuff on Instagram at warren.davis. So I follow the convention of Life.Church, but it's all spelled out. Okay, so at warren.davis, and you can shoot me a line there. But other than that, just drop me an email. I'd love to connect and connect with you in your ministry. If there's any way I could resource you, that'd be great.
Man, I love it. And I love that the open spirit of Life Church continues to multiply. So we'll put all that in the show notes. But Warren, thank you so much for your time, man. Blessings for you.
All right. Thank you so much, Luke.
Thank you guys so much for tuning into the podcast this week. I hope you found the conversation with Warren interesting. If you want to learn more about Amplio, more about the Dolly Plus, more about Keith's Hot Take, I don't really know what there is more to learn about it, but if you have thoughts and you want to share them with us, their email is shared below. Or if you want to register for SALT 2025, all of that's linked in the show notes. You can go check that out. Next week, we're going to be hearing from Jay Cranda, author of Online Church is Not the Answer. So you're going to want to, it's kind of a continuation maybe of this conversation today. So you want to check that out. Also, if you've been listening to this podcast for a while, drop us a 5-star rating. Make sure to subscribe or follow. If you're on YouTube, subscribe below and turn the notifications bell on so you can get every episode that we post. We post every week. You're not going to want to miss that. And share it with a friend if you found it valuable. That means a lot to us and it helps us a lot. And it can help your friend out. And we want to add value to other people's lives. So let's do that.
We appreciate you.
Yes. Thank you so much. Thank you, Keith, for joining me. We'll see you again next week.